All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, folks. Would somebody please confirm you see the screen and you can hear me correctly? Type a message in. Perfect. Thank you. Wonderful. Great. Okay. I think we have all the people that are attending, so we might as well get started. Morning again, folks. Jack Allsop here. Our weekly meet in cyberspace, for the want of a better word. Folks, I'm going to use this 2012 R2 server today. To me, it's irrelevant what I use. The same concept applies. So today our little discussion is about VSS. Any questions though, folks, I'd like you to hold to the end, if you wouldn't mind. Well, you can type them in, but I'll just deal with them at the end if that's okay. The particular reason I've chosen to use this particular server, apologies, it's what I use to describe a perfect ideal situation when it comes to SQL. Okay, so basically what I've got here, folks, is a Windows 2012 box. I have a whole bunch of different drives. They are not partitions, they are physical drives. If I open up Shadow Protect on this particular machine and I go to disk map, you get a very clear picture. They are individual drives, they are not partitions. Okay, I intend just to cover this a little bit, just so people understand where I'm coming from and what I'm going to do. Okay, and it's the way we interact with VSS and the way we should do certain things and get our heads around where certain bits of data are stored and how we can get the best performance out of our Windows boxes with VSS, because it's not a simple case of just understanding VSS anymore. You need to understand a few bits and pieces that are wrapped around the damn thing. So let us start, shall we? We'll just leave that like this. You can see the appropriate partitions, okay, or sorry, volumes I should say. So I have C drive, where obviously the OS and SQL binaries installed. Okay, so you can see my SQL installation is there. There is absolutely no data there, folks. If you have a look here, this is my SQL data and it's all stored in here. Okay, and I intend to cover off a few of these bits and pieces as well. My log files, however, are sitting down over here for my production databases only. Then I have these two other volumes, one for the page file and Windows temporary, and the bottom one is for the most, I believe one of the most important databases is the SQL temporary database. While the server's running, it's critical, and the other one there is for those U-Butte SQL backups. Okay, so this is the scenario that I'm going to use today. So let's talk through a few things. The first thing to understand with VSS, folks, is purely and simply, let's type in VSS admin, and we're going to go to list providers. Okay, before I go any further, okay, you can see this particular one, and this is what I'm using 2012. Things have changed a little bit, but the concepts are identical. Okay, you just need to understand them a little bit more, in more depth. Now, VSS, Volume Shadow, it's called the Microsoft Volume Shadow Copy Service. 99% of people, I shouldn't be that specific, a lot of people have a misconception that the Volume Shadow Copy Service does snapshots, it does backups, and in fact it does none of those things. Absolutely none. What it does, and I like to be very, very specific about this, I simplified a little bit, but to help explain, VSS, the Volume Shadow Copy Service as we know it today, the simple fact of the matter is it is a simple-minded but very smart service that allows me to get to the sector in a very smart way. And this is the crux of the whole issue. Okay? So the simple-minded part. On this particular server, there are 4 registered providers. Okay, I will talk about 2 of them. The other 2 are basically the same thing, but for a specific reason. There are 4 registered providers and potentially a 5th that's unregistered. This is a SQL server, folks, and the SQL server maintenance plan is an unregistered provider because it's the only animal in the Microsoft world that has the ability or the right to bypass providers and think the maintenance plan is the provider and talk to VSS. Okay, just remember, VSS only allows me to get to the sector level in a smart way. So let's start with it. What is a provider? A provider basically can, in our case, will create the snapshot. In Microsoft's case, like the bottom one there, it's called Microsoft Software Shadow Copy Provider. That provider works in conjunction with, say, Windows Backup or previous versions, okay, to create the snapshots, and they then store them in the system volume information folders, okay? It's just for previous versions and bits and pieces like that. And folks, let's not be too blind about this. Let's say there was a share sitting on this volume. Those previous version backups are stored in there. By default, folks, they run twice a day, 7 o'clock in the morning and lunchtime, exactly on the hour. You need to be a little careful about what we're about to say. So that backup software or previous versions calls this provider to talk to VSS to do something, and we'll get to what they're going to do. The one at the top here is called StorageCraft Volume Snapshot Software Provider. Our service called vSnap VSS. The first thing that I'd like to cover off in a very simple manner is do not, under any circumstances, call 2 providers at exactly the same time. You will take this very smart service and turn it into a blabbering idiot, basically. It will not do what you want it to do. 10 seconds apart, not a problem. 30 seconds apart, beautiful. A minute apart, absolutely wonderful. The same split second, you will turn the Volume Shadow Copy service into a knucklehead, basically. It will refuse to do what it's supposed to do, and you'll end up with all sorts of what I call crash-consistent backups. If that's what you're looking for, then do what you like, I guess. All right. The iSCSI one is to do iSCSI stuff, and then the Microsoft File Share Shadow Copy Provider is the new one that sort of works in conjunction with the previous versions, bits and pieces. They've added a special one in there to do a few things slightly different, but it's just file share. Okay, the same concept though. VSS will not like you at all if you call any of those providers at the same time. You call a SQL maintenance plan at the same time as you call us. So my first big hot tip for the day, folks, never, under any circumstances, do a Shadow Protect backup on the hour. Get it off the hour, even by 1 minute, for crying out loud. It'll just make your life so much more comfortable. Okay, so what's the next bit of this whole VSS thing? We've dealt with the simple-minded part. We haven't dealt with the smart part. So let's have a look at the smart part, shall we? Just typed in writers, folks. And on this circus, it's not doing an awful lot. It was fairly quick today. But let's just have a quicker look at what are writers. Task scheduler, VSS metadata, performance, system, SQL writer, that's critical, ASR, the automated system recovery, registry writer. There should be a COM plus one here somewhere, shadow copy optimization, WMI, and a bits writer. Most of these writers, if not all except for one, Basically what they do is they flush it to disk. For example, if this was a domain controller, you'd find there'd be a NTDS one and a DFSR, Directory Services Replication Writer. What they basically are intended to do is flush to disk. And if you understand the way Shadow Protect works in conjunction with STC VSM, which is our low-level kernel I/O filter driver, whose entire role in life is to record those sector changes in a kernel bitmap file, when those services flush everything to disk, it records those changes in the bitmap file so we can quickly gather our snapshot to write to disk to say, all right, this is our snapshot and that's what we're going to back up. I did say all, most, not all. There's one particular writer on a SQL server, folks, that you need to be a little careful with. The one you need to be a little careful with, folks, is the SQL writer. The SQL writer is the only writer that does not flush to disk. What it will basically do with SQL is the temporary database is like a sparse file. It is used for very quick ad hoc bits and pieces. Okay, so you'll see an awful lot of stuff, commits, writes, whatever being just chucked in, inserts. They just chuck them into the temporary database basically. And then when SQL gets its head around what's going on, it pulls out of the temporary database, puts it in a log file, then starts the atomic commit process to put it in the database. Okay? What happens when we call our provider, for example, calls VSS to say, right, I'm going to back up. And in this particular case, folks, I would have to back up my D and F drive in the same job because I want both of them snapshotted at exactly the same time to end up with what I would call consistent data, integrity of the consistent backups of the data, okay? So, in this case, I would back up my E and F drives. In this, what happens with the SQL writer is it says to the temporary data, well, it says to SQL, if you pull anything out of the temporary database, finish it and do no more. And it goes, yep, right, done. It then goes to the actual production databases, okay, master model, which doesn't get used a lot, MSDB data, all these other, and all your true production databases. And it says if you're committing something from your log files to your database, the true atomic transaction, finish it and do no more. What it then does, and if you could imagine for the sake of the exercise, what that particular writer does, folks, just imagine your left hand being a cup. What it does is that cup can read of all the frozen database files sitting on disk. It reads out of them. For any queries, it just reads from those, but stores that information in the VDI. It's called a SQL Virtual Device Interface, this cup thing. It is in memory, okay? Because we actually, not we, but Microsoft have to actually lock all the sectors and bits and pieces for a backup process. So SQL, they create this VDI. Any queries get stored in there. Any new commits get stored in there. And it's just as if nobody even knows what the hell's going on because they're not intended to know. And that VDI is held for the duration of the backup. Okay? That's why it's critical to sort of performance tune your SQL boxes in particular very well. Meet Microsoft standards with that, and a thing just works without failure. Okay, obviously when the whole backup is complete, then the VDI flushes back down into disk. Okay? Especially into the temporary database in particular. Okay? Now, what are some of the other smarts associated with VSS? There's a couple of things you can do, folks, to assist yourself with this whole VSS process. Okay? One of the things that I'm first going to say is, for example, and we'll ignore that this is a SQL database at the moment, but, you know, we'll just go in here and we'll pick a particular file, you know. Let's just say, I don't know, this particular database, okay? just treat it as a file for the moment. Not actually a SQL database, but let's say it's an Exchange database, which was frozen and then thawed. The backup hasn't finished, but we've thawed it. What happens if something needs to write to one of those sectors that are being protected? Protected by what? VSS. VSS is extremely smart. This is why you don't want to damage it in any way. VSS will allow those writes to happen, but it will not happen to the sector that the file allocation table thinks it's writing to. It stores it in the volume shadow storage area for the duration of the backup. It will then, at the end of the backup, flush them back into the correct place it needs to go. So there's a couple of bits and pieces here we need to talk about, folks. So let's just go here, standard old 2012 box. I'm not interested in previous versions because I got it turned off, but I am interested in shadow copies. Okay? See how I've got what you would call previous versions or shadow copies? I've got it completely disabled, haven't I? Okay? What you should do is pick one of the disks in particular that's not working as hard as other disks. You know, those two disks in this RAID 10 solution here, two RAID 10s, would be working quite hard. But this one here is a single disk. So here we go. Why don't we do this? Because previous versions, I don't want to have to back them up in a normal Shadow Protect backup. And this is all part of the VSS interfaces. So let's assume there was a couple of shares on here. There are no shares, but there is one up here. Okay? So I could actually say, well, if there were previous versions, which I have disabled, I'm going to go Settings. Do not store them on the C drive. Store them on the G drive and assign a limit. Okay? And go OK. So that then VSS, for example, here I might say no limit and we'll go OK. Alright? What VSS will then do is store that information down on this disk, not on the disk we're trying to back up at the moment, and I'll make sure that I'm not backing up the backups. The other thing very, very clearly here that we need to also describe, okay, like this one here, we'll change that. We'll put it on the same place. Okay, and I'm going to go no limit again, and we'll go OK, and we'll pick the F drive. And we will go settings on it. We will change that and we will go to the G drive again. No limit, because they're the three volumes that I am backing up. These other two volumes, the page file one and the temporary database one, I will back up once for system integrity and never again. This has done a couple of things for me. Even if it was just a pure file server, what it's done is removed the volume shadow copy previous versions backups which are stored in that particular folder, taking them off the drives I'm trying to back up with Shadow Protect and stick them somewhere else. Okay? That allows then for VSS to be a little bit more responsive under heavy loads with certain systems. The other thing that I will specify here, and I'll specify it right now, and I'll go back to this level here first. I mean, this system obviously doesn't have any data on it, and you know, it's just bits and pieces to show people what it looks like. But free space, folks, free space is critical to VSS. Free space is obviously critical to Windows, and free space is critical to Shadow Protect. Why? If you get down to about 12.5% free space and you have a volume that's getting a very high rate of change, data rates of change during the day between backups, it is quite possible at the time of the backup that the backup will fail because the snapshot file was written to the free space area but not recorded by the file allocation table, and as Shadow Protect goes to read it, it's going to run out of space. Okay, the file will get overwritten. VSS trying to hold some of these flushes will not be able to hold it. It'll just throw the flushes away, and bits and pieces like that. So you need to make sure that you deal with it in the best manner possible. The real positive sides of all of this is if you do it right, you will get very perfect, very accurate, split-second, point-in-time, sector-based backups of your volumes that are restorable. The integrity of the data is perfect. The Exchange one, which I'm sure everybody's seen me show before today, the Exchange one, the writer, that whole provider, VSS writer, backwards, forwards, up, down, and round, actually truncates the Exchange log files. We don't do it. VSS doesn't do it, but the writer calls the Exchange information structures and says to Mr. ESE, you got anything else to do? And it'll say, oh, well, you've done a full backup. I will now see if there's any log files to be truncated, and it'll just do it. It's in the log files all day. So from my perspective, folks, the interaction of VSS is critical. Do not, okay, and remember this one, do not call two providers at the same time, okay, critical. Previous versions, if you're required to use it, try to find a disk that perhaps is a utilities disk where I can keep the previous versions on so that I don't have to, and by me I mean Shadow Protect does not have to back up the backups. Third thing is always enable and make sure there's always enough free space. And I say 12.5% is minimum. Okay. Now I say that as a general guideline. I've seen it work right down to about 7 or 8%, but you're getting into dangerous territory, folks, especially if the data change rates of data between backups are significant. You will get into all sorts of problems. Okay? You imagine trying to back up 4.5 million sectors every 30 minutes. It can cause fundamental issues with the whole way VSS functions. Okay? Now, having said all of that, folks, this is a fairly short one, fairly to the point. Are there any questions, folks? We have one here. Perfect. Just 2 seconds. Question I basically believe is if I go back in here to properties and I go to shadow copies, okay, the question is after I change the location where the backup files are stored, do you have to enable it? No, basically not. Sorry. If somebody had previous versions turned on, yeah, absolutely I would turn it on and I've got it stored on a different location. But I would still, where possible, pick a drive like our file server in North Sydney has a utilities partition on which we have stored Windows Server Update services. Okay? I backed it up once, I'll never back it up again, but the data partition on that server is the E drive. I've done exactly this. I've shifted it to another location because I was starting to run out of a bit of space and I was getting down to about 20%. I wasn't getting backup failures, but I wanted to make sure that I would not have backup failures. And all I've done is shifted the storage area. Okay? I am not shifting the previous versions because I haven't got it turned on. But if I've shifted the storage area to this location, then the previous versions, and I did actually enable that, for example, okay, if I went yes there, okay, and if you have a look here and I go settings for that particular one, it's on the G drive and that's how much space it's actually going to use. Yes, I will disable that because I don't want to have previous versions, okay, but it's all stored on a separate volume, okay, and that's the trick behind it. I don't want to have to store bits and pieces on volumes that I'm trying to back up. That's all. Okay. Interesting question, this one. Somebody here's asked a particular question about the importance of, if it's important to not call two providers at the same time, is Shadow Protect looking into a way of checking if a provider is going to be called before it calls itself? Will this ever be possible? It would be damn near impossible to sort that out, because things like SQL maintenance plans, we'll have no idea what a SQL maintenance plan is going to do. Is it possible to check into the task scheduler, the previous versions and all those sorts of bits and pieces? Yeah, I'm sure it is. But I've just found it's a simpler thing to simply remember: never ever call Shadow Protect backups on the hour. You simply do that. For example, I don't know if I've even got backup jobs on this machine. Yes, I do. So let's have a look at these jobs, okay? Here's the C drive job. All right. For me, it's quite simple to say, there you go, 401 and 1101. When 7 o'clock rolls around, if there were previous versions, well, I'm 1 minute after that. VSS can handle two providers as long as they come in within, you know, a millisecond of each other. It's not a problem. It's the same millisecond as where VSS has a problem. It is clever. It is very smart. But if you call exactly the same millisecond two providers, yep, it's going to have a problem. So I just simply prefer, you know, as part of my processes, I just simply take it off the hour, and then I don't have a problem. Okay, it's something I've done for 8 years now. I just don't have a problem. Let's have a look at my F drives, because I'm doing those two together. This is a SQL box, remember? Okay, E and F, yeah, absolutely. Yep, perfect. 406, 1106. Again, I'm not on the hour. I'm not when anything else is calling it, and I'm done and dusted. Okay? It's just a simple little, I don't know, thing to keep in the back of your mind, I guess, folks, to simply say, yep, potentially could be a problem. Let's not do it. Okay? Interesting question. This one here is a question. How many times a day would you recommend backing up a SQL box? Okay. A little bit outside the guidelines of what the thing is today, but if this was a production system, this is what I do for 99% of people. So I will go, even though this one happens in the next day, between the hours of basically 6 minutes past midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning, there's a couple of hours there where I won't. That gives me time to do other things. You still need a SQL maintenance plan. You still need SQL maintenance plans to do things like reference checking, integrity checking, recreating indexes. And you also need once a day to create a SQL maintenance plan to do the transaction log backups, because the only thing that will truncate the damn things is a SQL maintenance plan. VSS won't do it. VSS is the only animal that Microsoft have made is SQL, and the only way to truncate is to do a SQL maintenance plan. So I always leave this little bit of a 2-hour window. I can eliminate that down to a 30-minute window if I need to, but I've done quite a bit of work with a particular bank, and they're quite happy to go for this. And they just say, yeah, that's cool. That gives us a 2-hour window to do these other bits and pieces. It also allows them to do some dedicated updates if they have to do some updates that have already been, tested in development, and it gives them that 2-hour window when traditionally SQL servers are basically not as heavily used. They obviously have, this particular bank had over 70 of these damn SQL boxes, so they could spread the loan, take one offline, and do whatever else they needed to do. So they were happy to do that. Okay. Question. Never used to, but I'm just about to have a look. Sorry. Question's been asked you just as an observation. If a shadow copy is enabled and the location is changed, it will delete all of the previous versions of shadow copies. Okie dokie. So let's go to the settings on here, and it's stored on the G drive. I'm going to go no limit, and I'm going to go, let's enable this thing. Okay. If you enable, we'll use a default schedule, which is 7 o'clock in the morning. Important. Okay. The default settings are not appropriate for servers that have high I/O load. The heavy use system should use manually configured and place a storage area and a volume that will not be shadow copied, which is basically what I've been trying to say. Okay, do you want to enable? Yes, we will. Okay, perfect. Okay, so if I look at the settings for this particular one, okay, and I look at the details of this particular one, the C drive has no limit and it's using 2.93 gig at the moment, yes? For me to shift it afterwards, I will have to basically disable this, okay, to shift it to a different location. Yes, you are correct. That's what I will have to do. Because for me to shift it now, I can't shift it. See how I can't pick it? It won't let me shift it. So I would have to disable, and it will say, if you do this, I will completely delete them. You go, yes. You then pick this thing and shift it to the other location. Yeah, for sure. Just something you need to take into account when you build your servers to ensure that you're getting the best benefit for your customers. Is there any downside to disabling a certain VSS writer? How would I answer that? Personally, I will never ever disable a VSS writer. If there was ever one that I was going to disable, it would be one that 99.9% of people don't ever use anyway. And I'll show you what I mean. If I go here to options and I go to agent options, you have the ability to disable a writer in here. Okay. So you can go exclude VSS writers, and you can type in the writer. The one particular writer that I would probably, if it was causing me grief, as it does sometimes, is this particular one here, the automated system recovery writer. 99.99% of people don't use ASR the way it's intended to be used, or the way Microsoft would like you to use it, perhaps. That one there sometimes does cause grief, and on very rare occasions inside of here I've said please exclude it because it's causing you grief. Most production servers it's not a problem. A couple of the SBS varieties it was an issue with that because it had a weird permission from default about who could call it, and it wasn't the system, so it used to cause certain problems. Some people just said disable it or change the permissions on the actual writer itself in the registry. Basically that's what it was, just add the system in and then you didn't have to exclude. But no, normally I will not disable a VSS writer because I am looking for those consistent data integrity backups, if that makes sense. It is an interesting one, this one. What do I mean by crash consistent backup? If I took this server here, okay, I'm just going to minimize this other screen for a minute. If I took this server here and I just hit that and said power off the machine, it would be like pulling the power cables out the back of a server. That is basically putting this system into a crashed state, and it is called crash consistent. So when it starts up, it says, apart from the fact it says, why did I shut down unexpectedly, some of the data that's on that machine will be just lost, destroyed. It could roll back in Active Directory. It could roll back USN numbers in Exchange. It could have a real heart attack and go, but I can't do this and I can't do that. could take it could take 10-15 minutes for it to sort itself out. SQL will just blow away your temporary databases, and if it's not in the log file and it can't then commit transactions, it's just going to go, well, guess what? It's a pile of junk, you know. I strongly recommend to people, even if it's the absolute dead set last resort, try to allow a system to do a graceful shutdown, to not force reboot. We used to force reboot servers, you know, back years ago. Try to hell to avoid that stuff, because you end up with crash consistent data. And remember, it's crash consistent with a crash, if that's the way you would prefer that word to be used. Okay. Interesting question, this one. Questions being asked about this, use VSS. And it says, when would you not use the use VSS option? When would I do this? If the particular company, I'll explain what it's about. If the particular company had a file server and their word editor of choice was Notepad, as you know, Notepad's either in memory or it's on disk. There is no in between, not like Word, which creates tilde files. You could untick that box and not use VSS, because it would just simply go, fine, they're the sectors I'm backing up and I'll back them up. Interesting thing is, I tested this one day on a file server where I wrote a couple of scripts to actually call various versions of Notepad to open up a bunch of files. Yes? And I tested the difference, and then I went to the Americans and I said, why did you put this option in there? And they explained the option, the particular custom they had that asked for this option, because I figured if I didn't have to use VSS, it would be quicker. So the basic answer that came back was they had a file server that was about 2 terabytes of data, and believe it or not, they didn't use Word for text editing. They used a couple of programs, basically enhanced versions of Notepad. So they did incremental backups using that, what you see there now, and they didn't use VSS. And then I just asked out of curiosity, I said, what would happen if you actually ticked the box? And they said, don't know, let's ask them. So the guy said, sure, let's have a little play. So they turned it back on, and they found the snapshot at any time throughout the day. The snapshot period was the same. And I'm going, well, why would you turn VSS off? Because if all of a sudden somebody slipped in a Word document, you would actually lock the Word document. You would actually lock the Access database. You would actually lock the Excel spreadsheet. The whole concept behind using VSS is to, from a sector level, still say to the end user, sure, you keep playing away with your Excel spreadsheet, it's no problem, but I've got these sectors locked and I'll deal with the bits and pieces in between. So I personally can never ever see a value. I actually wish they'd take this away. Seriously wish they would take it away, because it just confuses some people. Always use VSS, in my opinion, and then you will have data integrity regardless of what the heck is thrown at you. Okay, hope that explained that one. Okay, just 2 seconds. I just want to find where this one's come from. Okay. Gentleman was asking the question, and I just need to get his original question back. Are there any downsides to disabling a VSS writer? Just that crash issue. But he then came back and asked the question. They found that sync share conflicted with Shadow Protect whilst we are using work folders in 2012 R2. I would simply ask this gentleman a simple question. Are you using the new, I don't know what the best way to describe it is, it's the newer version of offline files? If that's the case, you need to find out at what times it synchronizes. There is potentially an issue on the client side that they would see perhaps some locked files because of that. But if you wouldn't mind, sir, would you run that particular question via your account manager? I would like to communicate with you offline, if you wouldn't mind, just to get my head around exactly what it is you're trying to achieve with this one and to see if we can come up with a better answer for you. So the gentleman that's asked the question, reason being is that we found that sync share conflicted with Shadow Protect in 2012 R2. If you wouldn't mind, contact your account manager so we can have an offline discussion on that one, please. Good question. This one here, folks. This discussion again. I'll read this question. Does the Shadow Copies location on the Disk Properties tab determine where Shadow Protect stores the snapshot data, or is this just for Windows previous versions? It's for Windows previous versions and also for the VSS, because if you notice here, the storage area, this is the storage area we are talking about, the storage area. The Shadow Protect, when it creates a snapshot from that kernel bitmap file, writes it to the free space on the volume it's about to back up. So that's why free space is so important, okay? VSS also uses that free space, okay? Unless you've shifted it, VSS also uses that free space to store the writes that are happening. So no, Shadow Protect will always store the snapshot on the volume you are backing up. Whew. This is an interesting question. I'll answer this question here. It's an interesting one. What is my view on deleting VMware or Hyper-V snapshots whilst the Shadow Protect backup is in progress? Interesting. Are we deleting one that's already been rolled in, or are we deleting one that it's currently running from? That is the tricky question. If we're deleting one that's currently and we're rolling backwards, you can really confuse Shadow Protect. It will just go VDIF is turned off and VDIF will be turned on at the next backup, because it will have no idea of what happened. It will be basically what will happen. It'll try to finish the current backup, and then it's just going to go, hang on a minute. When it tries to do the next one, it's going to do a diff gen because it thinks it's been rolled back to a completely different location, and it's going to say, well, I'm supposed to be looking for incremental, for the sake of the discussion, 999, but the registry is now telling me, because we deleted a snapshot, the registry is now telling me I should be looking for incremental 855, and you go, well, what about all these other ones I've done? And it will try to recreate 856, and it'll just, somebody will just get screwed over. So I would be very careful about doing that, and try not desperately to do them while Shadow Protect is in the process of backing up. Okay. All right. Folks, some really interesting questions in amongst that lot, and I do thank you for that. I love a challenge occasionally. Interesting questions, the way people look at things. That's good. Very good. All right, folks, apart from that one gentleman about that other question, please, sir, I would like you to contact your account manager. I don't want to broadcast your name out, sir, but if you wouldn't mind, contact your account manager so we can have an offline discussion about that particular issue. Not because I'm not sure of your answer, I'm just not quite sure what we're trying to achieve. That's all. Okay? As far as everyone else is concerned, folks, I think I'm done for the day. Okay? Therefore, I'd like to say thank you very, very much for attending. I hope you all picked up something out of this. And enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Okay? Thanks, folks. Goodbye.